What's going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Your guys, Derek and Cody, joining you as always. And see, I already messed it up, man. I'm going from one side to the other because I'm used to pointing this way, but I'm on this side now, so I got to point that way. See how it is? But anyway, guys, today by the time this video gets out, not 100% sure which day this will be out, but basically training camp is going to be about 2 weeks out from the time this video gets out. So we figured we talk about a few guys that could be on the roster bubble going into training camp and going into the season. Now, just for disclaimer, we're not talking about rookies in this. We're going to talk specifically about veterans or some second year guys that have been on the roster or at least have been a part of the team for a little bit and will be guys that we're going to keep an eye on. So first guy here, Cody, and it seems like you mentioned it right before we started recording this. Seems like this guy's been on this list every single off season now for about 3 off seasons in a row. We're talking about Ben Banogu. Obviously, Ben Banogu, when drafted in 2019, he was kind of the wow factor, right? He was kind of the mystery one. We didn't 100% know what he was going to be utilized for, but the athletic ability certainly intrigued people. But nevertheless, after his rookie season, really have not seen much of any of Ben Banogu over the last 2 seasons. And we're wondering, this might be the time for him to potentially do something, because if not, Ben Banogu may not be on this roster for a while.
I think at this point, it's more likely that he's not on this roster than it is he is, just because he's had how many off seasons to figure this thing out, right? I think the only potential saving grace for Ben Banogu is the scheme change and the new defensive coordinator, the new defensive line coach. Maybe they can get something out of him because he has done nothing since his rookie season. Absolutely nothing. Right. We all remember the play he had against Joe Flacco and the Ravens. That's the only play I can recall when Ben Banogu did anything of note for this team. And this is his last chance. Like, I know we've said this before, but like, this literally is his last chance. This is a contract year for him. If he does not perform with the upgrades the Colts have had and the way the last couple off seasons have addressed specifically defensive end, how heavily they have. I see a scenario where he's on the outside looking in, Derek, and he's going to really have to step it up tenfold in training camp and in the preseason and stuff if he wants any chance to make this roster. Because I feel like right now, like I said earlier, there's more of a chance he doesn't make this roster than, in my opinion, than he does right now.
Yeah, and I mean, when it comes to the defensive line group as is, I mean, that kind of tells you something because, the defensive end position for Indianapolis is actually somewhat thin. I mean, you really only have about 4 technically defensive ends on the roster. Maybe not even be that. So, when you're looking at it from that perspective and you're talking about, Banogu maybe not even being on the roster, I mean, it goes to show you just how little that some people will think about him. Like you said, there's been a lot of opportunities for him and it's just not worked out. And he has not been taking full advantage of it. And we're just going to have to see where he goes from here. Cause I mean, you're right. In a position now where this defensive line group has been drastically improved this offseason with adding of Yannick Ngakoue, and now you have Dayo Odeyingbo now having his first full offseason to do everything that he wants to. Ben Banogu is going to get left in the dust here in a little bit if he doesn't do something. And Tyquan Lewis now being back, there's minimal opportunities here, and hopefully now he takes advantage in training camp, because you're right. If not, Ballard will find somebody else that's willing to put in the work.
Absolutely. And also it was telling, I thought this is where you're going to go, but this is another point I thought of when you were talking is look at the defensive end position the last couple of years, right? How bad it's been, right? How bad it's been. And still Banogu has not made an impact. So if that tells you how little the Colts feel about how good, how much he's performing, how well he'd perform, that should right there tell you that even though they were struggling at that position, they still did not play him. He was a healthy scratch a lot of times, right? So there is the room for improvement. He can only go up, it seems like at this point, because he's kind of at the lowest of lows right now in terms of where he is as a player.
Oh, yeah, absolutely agree with that. All right, well, let's move on to the next player here that we have, and that is Marvell Tell. So, obviously, Marvell Tell, we talked about him in another video recently. Him as a cornerback, obviously, was drafted in 2019, played pretty well at the end of the 2019 season. We thought, oh, this could be a dark horse guy at the cornerback position. And then, sure enough, 2020 comes around. He was one of the few players that decided to opt out for the 2020 season, came back in 2021, but ultimately was more of a practice squad guy and actually was released from the Colts earlier this offseason and then got re signed back just a few days later. So, there's opportunities here, Cody. We've seen minimal action from Marvell Tell, but in 2019, he did show he had some potential. What are your thoughts on Marvell Tell making the roster?
I don't know how good it is, Derek, because can he play special teams? I don't know if he can. Like he's already had to make that transition from free safety to corner. Can he? If he can't provide anything on special teams, what value does he really have for this team? I think he's going to be probably another practice squad guy again because your top four corners. There's no question who your top four corners are, and how many other corners do you keep? Maybe he slides in as like that fifth corner. But like I feel like the Colts would elect to go with a guy that plays special teams, right? I think they would. So if he can't play special teams, I think he's probably going to be a practice squad player. But the talent is there, Derek. We know he's physically gifted. He's got a lot of upside, but he hasn't really tapped into that beyond what we saw a little bit his rookie season. And he hasn't really had a lot of chances to do so. So I think he has an opportunity here to make an impact, and maybe he does start to play some special teams, wants to make the final 53 man. But as it stands right now, I probably think he's just more of a practice squad guy. But he's certainly in the conversation on that bubble.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the cornerback position as it is now, obviously Stephon Gilmore, Isaiah Rodgers, Kenny Moore round out your top three. But then behind it, I mean, this is where Marvell Tell does have it going for him. I mean, really the only corner that has had like significant and somewhat productive corner play is Brandon Faison. And he's going to be your corner four. But after that, Marvell Tell, there is open availability for Marvell Tell to show something because Anthony Chesley is your cornerback five. Now, I mean, obviously, Anthony Chesley has been a guy that was a last resort many years now for the Colts when it comes to the cornerback room. Now, in my opinion, I would love to see more of a Marvell Tell in that situation. But at the end of the day, you're right. It is going to come down to, will you play some special teams for him? I mean, that's what it is for cornerbacks 5 and 6 when the Colts have that roster. I don't know how many guys they actually kept on the roster last year when it came to the cornerback room. I'm guessing it was 5, but at the end of the day, Marvell Tell, he's also got to fight with Rodney Thomas, who just got drafted out of Yale. So, Thomas is more of a now, I think Thomas is more of a safety mold, but the Colts scouting report said that they wanted him to potentially get a look at corner. So there's that opportunity for Rodney Thomas, and Chris Wilcox is in there and, things like that. So it's not going to be a walk in the park for Marvell Tell. Obviously, Marvell Tell was higher drafted on their draft board in 2019 than what some of these other guys were. So it makes you look at what Marvell Tell is able to do potentially. Just ultimately, can he lock back into that 2019 form that we saw from him? And when he took a year off of football in 2020, I mean, that hurts a young player's developmental ability. So we'll see what happens as it goes along. I mean, it's a 50-50 shot at this point.
Yep, we'll see. We'll see. All right, the next group of guys we want to talk about, we're going to group two guys in here. Really, it's those back end positions at the wide receiver position. We didn't include guys like Mike Strawn or Desmond Patman because they're still very young players. Wanted to look more at the veteran guys here. So the two guys that we decided to talk about was Kiki Kuti and DeMichael Harris. Neither guy really made much of an impact last year at all. I would even say Patman made more of an impact than they did last year. But both these guys have shown in flashes in the NFL that they can do some things. But I think they're certainly going to be in competition with a lot of guys, trying to round out those, other one, potentially two positions at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, and DeMichael Harris has been a guy that has always remained on the roster due to the fact that he does play special teams. He has been willing to be in that role, and occasionally when the receiver group gets thin, he does have those one or two touches every now and again that reminds you, oh, there's still a number 12 on this team. Yeah, it reminds you of that. And obviously Kiki QT, a veteran in this league, has been around for quite a few years and has been, what we deemed as the Colt killer when he was on the Texans for many years. Because, honestly, he was the guy that used to have the best games against us. Even when DeAndre Hopkins was there, QT was the guy that sometimes put the dagger in games, and put the damper on the momentum. So QT definitely has that ability. When it comes to the other guys, like you said, with Strawn and Patman, those are the two other guys that are looking to try to advance into this role. If I had to take a guess on which one of these two guys that I think does make the roster, my guess is it probably ends up being Harris again, just simply due to the fact that he is able to play special teams every once in a while for you. I think that is what puts him at that mold at the 6 or 7 wide receiver, depending on how many they keep. So I think Patman and Strong both can make this roster. I think at least one of them will. My guess is Patman will probably end up making the roster. Still don't know everything about Strong at this point, but if I'm taking a guess, I'd say Harris makes this roster and QT probably does not.
Okay, gotcha. All right, next guy we want to talk about, veteran offensive tackle Jason Spriggs. Now, Spriggs was if you remember, former IU player, was drafted in the second round by the Green Bay Packers, and I think it was 2016. He's played a few games, started a few games. He's a veteran in this league. He's 28 years old. But I kind of look at it, Derek, and I'm like, the Colts already have Matt Pryor, Bernard Ryman, Braden Smith, and also they signed Dennis Kelly as well. So they have 4 tackles, and not even, forgetting to mention Ryan Vandemark, who they also, paid a lot of money for as an undrafted free agent. Does Jason Spriggs potentially find himself on the roster bubble and on the other side of the bubble where he doesn't want to be? I think it's potentially worth a conversation at least.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely can be. And, when you look at his depth chart ratings, he was also a guard at Indiana as well. So he does have that inside presence as well. And based on what his calculations are and what his measurables are, being 6'6", 300 pounds, being a guard is not out of the question for him. Obviously, Ryman is about the same size, but Ryman also is a guy that can still bulk up a little more, I think, in terms of how they want to use him. But for Spriggs, I think honestly, if you want to be on this roster, I think the best thing for him is learning to be a guard again. I think that would probably be the best thing for you because, like you said, the Colts have 4 bona fide tackles on this roster that they can easily throw in and out. And then, like you said, with Vandemark could be another one that could sneak his way in somehow, or he's going to probably remain a practice squad guy for the year. And then if one of our guys unfortunately goes out for an extended period of time, then you're going to have to sign Vandemark onto the active roster to be a backup role. I think for Spriggs, because right now for your guards, you only have at this moment Will Fries as a backup guard. You have a couple guys that could do it, but Spriggs is not a practice squad guy, or at least has more talent than what your traditional practice squad guy would be. And Will Fries is not going to be able to cover 2 guard positions. So if you wanted, and Spriggs was able to do it, Spriggs could be that backup left guard or potential right guard for Pinter or Nelson, barring severe problem happens. Say both of our guards go down and you have Will Fries in at one position and you have to have Spriggs at another, then that's what you would end up having to do. I think that's something that is what's going to maybe put him on the roster, is if he can thrive at the guard position, then I could see a spot where he does end up making this roster because he would be the 4th guard on your active roster.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm interested to see what he does, what his role is. Like you said, does he play more guard? Does he play more tackle? I think his best shot to make the roster, I agree with you, would be guard, but we shall see. All right. And the last kind of grouping, I guess, if you want to say that we want to talk about, are really the 3 or 4 running backs. We're going to talk about 3 of them after Nyheim Hines, right? So we're talking, of course, about Philip Lindsay, Tyson Williams, and Deion Jackson. Those are all veteran guys, if you will. Deion Jackson, the least amount of veteran, I guess, if you want to say it, because he was a rookie last year. But we want to talk about all these guys because I think they're all on the roster bubble, and I could see a scenario where any one of these guys could be the third running back on this team. And I think the Colts are probably going to keep 3. We'll see. But it feels like traditionally they've kept 3. I think they kept 3 last year, if my memory serves correctly as well. I know they've kept 4 at certain points as well, but I think they'll probably keep 3. We'll see. But I think certainly one of these guys is going to make the active roster for sure. It's just a matter of who will it be. I think we would say probably Philip Lindsay because he certainly has the best resume of any of these guys, a little bit older, more the veteran guy in this group. But Tyson Williams, he started a few games for Baltimore last year. Deion Jackson showed some things as well for you last year. So could one of these guys, be on the active roster? Could potentially 2 of these guys be on the active roster? And who's the odd man or odd men out in this situation?
Well, I think unfortunately for Deion Jackson, I think he'd be the odd man out in this, just simply due to the fact that, like you stated, Tyson Williams definitely showed some potential, and Philip Lindsay, his resume speaks for itself. I mean, when he first came into the league, he was widely renowned as one of the best running backs in the NFL at that time. So I think, yeah, Philip Lindsay is going to end up being the third running back for me because ultimately what we see in Philip Lindsay, he still has some of that in him. And he's a guy that definitely can still run in between the tackles. I think him and Tyson are definitely going to have a battle because Tyson, like you said, played in a run heavy system with the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously, he knows how to run the football. So that'll be interesting to see what they do. I mean, there is like 8 running backs on this roster at the moment, and it's just hard to keep track of who all, I mean, because unfortunately about 2 or 3 of these guys are going to get cut. 2 guys are going to get kept on the practice squad, and then you're going to have 3 guys on the active roster. So ultimately, who is that going to end up being? But if I had to take a guess, I'd say Deion's probably going to get kicked out of that spot. And then Tyson and Philip are going to have a battle for each other in training camp, but I think Philip edges it out.
We'll see. We'll see. It's going to be an interesting battle. But, guys, those are our look at some guys that we think are on the roster bubble, could potentially make the roster, could potentially not. Let us know your thoughts on these players. And are there any other players that you think potentially are going to be on the roster bubble? Let us know those things in the comments below. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. We really appreciate all your support. And as always, guys, go Colts.